Welcome back to the Hopelessly Gifted podcast. I'm your host, Mark Talaga. Okay, guys, today is a good episode for a lot of people around this time of year. You know, it's back to school. There's a lot of motivation from kids to go in and go in strong. And typically, that's exactly what happens. We have a good couple weeks for some of us, and then maybe in a month, 2 months, end of second semester, whenever it is, there's this drop off, this inability to sustain. And so what we want to look into today is, what does it really mean to create the executive function skill of sustaining, of staying with something? And there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and I'm going to try to sort through it all to help you better understand what it really takes to create the kind of consistency you're wanting in really anything you're doing. It doesn't have to be your kids in school. It could be your consistency in some habits, or your committing to a side project or a hobby or a creative venture like a podcast or something along those lines, and what really goes underneath making it successful. So the first piece I'd like to look at is, in our practice here, we use a lot of neuropsych testing with our kids, right? We want to really understand how their brain works and the areas of strength and vulnerabilities so that we can better support that and integrate it into the counseling process. One of the things that they look at is sustaining, because it's an executive function skill, and there's a lot of tests you can run to help people determine a kid's ability to do just that. So they're called CPTs, or continuous performance tests. So close. These CPTs, continuous performance tests, are something where you're looking at a computer screen and you have to stay connected to the task, where you're responding to target stimuli or you're ignoring other stimuli, and you just got to keep your focus. And so a lot of kids that have maybe more typical ADHD attentional symptoms, struggle with this task. They have a hard time just staying with the focus of what they're trying to accomplish, and it can be tricky. And so sometimes you find, hey, this kid has a little bit of trouble sustaining. I think that's helpful, but I've also seen it where kids do really well on tests like that, and then they can't create habits to save their life. And so there's more of a real world application surrounding sustaining that I think is more valuable to the listeners out there. We're not just going to have you take a test, and if they score well, they can sustain, and they're just not doing it, or they score poorly, and so they'll never be able to sustain anything. It just doesn't work that way. It's just so context specific. So let's talk more about what it means as a human being to be able to sustain. To create a change like that in your life, where you're staying consistent with, once again, anything, you need to have the foundational understanding of how you create two things at the same time: the consistency we're talking about, and then the commitment to it, right? Without consistency and commitment side by side, you don't really get change. And a big piece that people maybe undervalue, or society undervalues, is relationships in all of that. To stay committed to something requires you to have a relationship to others in order to stay accountable. And so if you're trying to, let's say, write every day, I want to be a writer, I want to work at my writing, and you're trying to do it all by yourself, alone in a vacuum, results may vary, right? Some people can do it. Some people have found ways to do it. But the reality is, if you don't have some conscious awareness of the purpose in it and why you're doing it and who you're doing it for, then you lose that ability to stay committed to it. So with writing, you're asking yourself, who am I writing for? Who is my audience? Or maybe I'm just writing for myself in a way to intentionally develop skill, but you have to have that relationship piece of who is the other. Because without that connection to others and accountability that comes from that, it is much harder to stick with. And so let's switch it over to like a gifted kid, and you're trying to get them to be more, consistent with brushing their teeth, right? I bring up that one a lot because it comes up a lot. It's just a real thing that happens for a lot of kids. That kid may be willing to stay consistent with it based off the intellectual understanding that if I don't, my teeth will rot, right? But the intellectual understanding alone isn't really enough for a lot of kids. There has to be the accountability piece. I'm doing this maybe because mom and dad put so much importance on it. I'm committed to it because I'm trying to develop, some sort of better way of being, or I want to learn to care about things. And the tricky part is how you figure or help that kid figure out the purpose underneath it and where the relationship lies within it so that you're more able to stay consistent. Speaking to my own personal experience with this podcast, creating episodes and creating funny, silly videos on my social media, it's work. It's a lot of things that I have to do, and it's a lot of time that I rarely have, but I stay committed. And maybe if I did it because of my own ego and I wanted just to be the most famous podcaster out there and I want all the clout and the glamour or whatever comes in the podcasting world, however high that can go, then I don't know if it would last. But what I always have to do is remind myself, hey, I might not do this perfectly, but it might help one person. It might help somebody. There's somebody out there that I have something to offer that maybe makes their life a little bit easier or clearer, or they use it to help somebody else. And that is how I stay committed. And I also have a team I work with, a producer, somebody that manages social media, my team at the center, who I am very accountable to. They are all in this with me. And sometimes that accountability is maybe more financial because I'm paying people to help. And sometimes it's, more emotional and supportive and mentoring in nature. But no matter what it is, if I'm going to stay committed and consistent, it has to be there. The idea of others and who I'm doing it for and what the purpose is. Only then can you really battle through what it takes to create habits and consistency. Because what they test for in those CPTs is a singular task that a lot of gifted kids can do really well. That's where hyperfocus comes in. If they want to switch it on because they want to do well in the tests, goodbye, they got it. They're going to not trick the test out, but a little bit, trick the test out and show what they're capable of in that moment of being really focused, hyper-focused. But really creating habits is a lot more executive function. It's a lot more organization and prioritization and it's a lot more organization and prioritization and sequencing and transitioning and time management and emotional regulation. There's a lot more pieces going into that puzzle. And doing it all alone is just a fool's errand. And so how do we stay connected with people? How do we create accountability in our own lives for what we're trying to make happen so that we can stay committed to it and then thereby stay consistent with it and then thereby creating the change you want to create? I'm doing the thing I want to be doing. And so if you don't have that foundational principle, you're, like I said, you're in trouble. There's, if anybody out there watched Ted Lasso, great show, love the show. And, it's a very heartwarming show, very uplifting show. And there is a part in it, and I'm going to forget the character's name, so you're going to have to forgive me. But there's a part where one of the bearded guy, who I can't remember his name, but he's kind of a gruff coach, kind of a tough guy, no emotional outside, even though he's really gooey on the inside. He's mentoring one of the, more ego-driven players, Jamie Tart. And he, in order to create the superstar player out of that guy, he had to create a strong relationship with him and thereby put consistency around it. So he would tell, Jamie, we're getting up at 4 a.m. every day and we're going running and we're practicing and you are going to hate me and you are not going to be able to breathe and you are going to want to quit. And Jamie shows up and they continue this for some time. And then sometime in the season, the coach, doesn't go because of some circumstance in the show. See how good my memory is? And you find out that Jamie shows up to his door and says, hey, man, let's run. We're supposed to be running right now. I don't care what else is going on. Let's keep it going. You have a student becoming the master. And when you really create a relationship like that and create the consistency around it, you are able to sustain and grow at an exponential rate. And I think that's important to know. This isn't one of those things where I get a little bit better over time. If you really create the foundation for what I'm talking about, you will see an exponential rate in growth. The process becomes that much more robust, and there's leaps in development, but you need the foundation, right? And sometimes what you find is when you start to build consistency with people and you utilize your relationship, it can weed people out of your life. And that's sometimes what people are really afraid of. If I really put myself out there and I really say, hey, I want to make this happen, you find that other people either don't value the relationship highly enough, or themselves are struggling with their own ability to create commitment to it. And you find that certain people will, fade away from you when you're trying to make that kind of change. That's a real risk that happens. And it's something you need to be aware of. And so I think, relating this to parents, the parents are going in with this idea of, if I come in heavy-handed and really put down the gauntlet that I am going to be here and we're going to be consistent about this and we're going to do that, that the kid might shy away or shut down or get overwhelmed, and the parent might be feeling like they made things worse. And the foundational piece has to stay intact. You're not doing anything wrong. You're actually doing it correctly. But there's some other pieces going on that where the person that you're trying to connect with isn't able to get where you're trying to go. But it doesn't mean you don't do it. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't mean you stop. It just means it's another point for evaluation or assessment. A teacher or a coach or whatever, they're going to try to grow either a student or an athlete. And the messaging behind it is, I understand this consistency and what it takes better than you because I'm supposed to. But ultimately, we need to understand and execute this together. That's what it's going to look like. And so parents are the same way. I know that this is what you're supposed to be doing every night when you brush your teeth, and I understand it better than you do. And that's normal because I'm the parent and I'm supposed to have more information about that. I have more life experience, da-da-da-da-da. But we need to understand what we're trying to do, and we're going to execute this together. And so on some level, as a parent, you need to put yourself into this process, into the process of what it means to stay committed. And sometimes you don't know what that process looks like. Well, I don't know what works for my kid. I don't know if they want me to remind them, or I don't know if they want me to stay with them or stay away from them. I don't know what that consistency looks like. And that does take some conversation. I just had a client recently where we talked about just that. What does the kid really need from mom and dad in order to stay more on task with the homework? And mom was making her best guess, and the kid wasn't really verbalizing what he really needed, and so nothing really changed. So my process was just to get it out on the table. What actually works for you? What doesn't work for you? Can we have this conversation about what help and commitment and accountability looks like? And when we did that, we were able to discover, okay, there's a way to go about this that's a little different. There's a little bit of an alteration, something we were missing, that the parent, now knowing that this is more helpful, at least for the time being, might change, you never know, they could commit to it. They could say, okay, if that's going to help, then absolutely I'm going to do it. And sometimes, when you have kids that are saying, you know what, mom and dad, I want you to hold me accountable to it. And they say, okay, there's not so much a clarity of what holding somebody accountable looks like. What does it mean to hold you accountable? Is it just, I get upset if you don't do the thing? I don't know if that's really it. It's more of this, okay, we're going to be in this together, and here's how I'm going to be consistent with you on that. And you talk it out. What does it need to look like? What does that consistency look like? And then and only then do you start to really build the commitment. But I'm telling you, if you throw yourself into this process, and it's going to be different for every kid out there. I know that there's a lot of people listening that they're like, that process won't work for X, Y, and Z. And this is when I say, reach out to me. Let's, put a question on our website, or, just connect to me directly, because I want to help people with that. But you do have to have some level of creativity about, okay, I have this relationship with a person I'm trying to help. I want to be the accountability person in their life. I want to help them understand their purpose to why they're doing what they're doing. And then here's how we think it's going to look. And that's the best you can do, right? That's basically it there. But you have the foundation. You have the real baseline relationship piece, and then the consistency piece and the accountability piece. And again, you go back to society, they put that last typically. Society puts it onto you. Here's the life hack, how you do it, how you're going to grow, how you're going to do this. And nobody says, here's how you build a team. Here's how you delegate. Here's how you use somebody in a form of accountability. Do you ever hear that really anywhere? No, it's always focused on the self and how the self needs to grow in a vacuum. It does not work that way. So you're always looking at, how do I create that initial buy-in as well, right? How do I get a kid on board that maybe doesn't seem like they are very much on board? It's a tricky one, right? It's context driven. For some kids, we've got to be very clear and evaluate, is this something that they want for themselves or something we're projecting onto them that we believe they want or should want or we actually want for ourselves? That happens more than you think. And if you have at least that former part where they say, no, this is something I want to do better, then you have to lay out the parameters, the foundation. Okay, here's what it's going to take. It's going to take commitment to this process that you are in, and I will be in as well. And what we're trying to figure out is what you need in the form of accountability and how we're going to create an equal exchange of energy between the two of us. You're going to be showing up and I'm going to be showing up. And this can work, in anything. It can work in business, right? And there's more of a financial component that comes to that equal exchange of energy. You're going to pay us this and we're going to provide that. And that is our commitment to each other. And here's how we're going to stay accountable. And it doesn't always have to be, financial. That energy that you're exchanging can be any number of things. I have a client that was really struggling with the idea of, what is the point of me doing my schoolwork? I don't get it. I don't find any value in it. I don't see the point of it. I cannot convince myself that this is worth doing. And now there's a lot in that statement, just so you know. But the piece that I picked up on was, you're making it seem like you have to have the purpose and the understanding of why you're doing it in order to do it. And so I simply threw out, what if you actually did it for somebody else? What would happen to your parents if you were more consistent in your work? How would that change your relationship? And this kid has such a great relationship with his parents that it was kind of this opening of his eyes of, oh, yeah, that I would be more into. I'd be more into doing it maybe for somebody else because I intellectually know it still has to get done. But I can't seem to summon up the purpose and reason for myself. But because it's my parents now, I could see myself being more willing to commit to the process of getting this work done. Now, there will be a byproduct of that where once they start to develop some mastery over that consistency, they might start to find the purpose for themselves and why they're doing it. But it doesn't have to come from there initially, because too often we as parents try to convince and rationalize and reason with kids of why they should behave in certain ways and why things are important. And it's not like it isn't valuable. It has, logic behind it, but you've got to call a spade when that kid is just like, I don't know, nothing you say is really going to click for me. And, and so sometimes I'll go the opposite way of, okay, well, what do you have to lose? If you don't care about trying and you can't figure out why you're doing it, why not do it? What do you got to lose here? So there's just different ways to approach this idea of how you create that level of buy-in from a kid about what they're doing and why they're doing it. But it has to be there, right? Back to the foundation. You have to have the relationship and the purpose. And so as you're figuring out, okay, I'm trying to help my kid navigate whatever they're trying to navigate. Now, actually, I'm going to interrupt myself because there's a million other components that go on, right? I talked about ADHD earlier. And yeah, there's some roadblocks that get in the way where there are actual learning difficulties in certain areas. Kids struggle to actually read. And so staying committed and consistent to their reading is kind of a fool's errand anyway until you assess for that. So to complicate the process even further, it always goes back to assessment. Why is it so difficult to stay committed? What do we feel like we might be missing? And what do we need to dive into a little further and evaluate on to get a sense of what's really going to work for that kid? So I always say this to everybody, and I'll say it again. If you get stuck on something, I'm not sure how to proceed, nothing seems to work, you go back to evaluation. What could I possibly be missing? What am I missing within myself, within them, within the context, blah, 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 blah. And so this is not an easy thing. I can give you a framework that you need the relationship and purpose and the commitment and the consistency, and it can make sense. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a little more messy than you think. And so, going back to my last episode on perfectionism, nothing's going to be perfect, but we are still going to do it. And we're going to show that we can be committed to a person and that we're willing to do it. That's what matters the most. And sometimes, we ask for people in life to be that accountability person, and then they fall through. They don't step up and don't bring what we were hoping they would bring in order to make the success happen. And so then you have a different problem. You're missing part of something in the relationship. Why did this fail? Why weren't you able to show up for me? What was the struggle? Are you not hearing how important it is to me? And what about this is important for you? And sometimes you have to help other people through the process of helping you, right? Help others help you. So it never really stops. You should never really fully feel stuck, because there should always be a step forward when you start to realize, okay, the relationship wasn't really there, or the commitment wasn't really there, and so we have to evaluate for that. Or the relationship is there and the commitment's there, but I'm still having such a brutal time doing whatever I'm trying to do, and so we have to look at what we might be missing. But you're always moving forward through the process. And as I always tell people, process has regression in it. It's built into forward momentum. It's going to be there. You have to have it. And so it's not going to be this, oh, we started and now it's, onward and upward forever and ever and ever. It's more like it's going to be stutter stops and stop to reevaluate and look again and find the people that are helping you help the other people, and so on and so forth. But there is a way to do it as long as you keep it grounded in foundation. Have I said that enough yet? Are you getting the point? Am I repeating myself? Well, hopefully, because sometimes that's what it takes with kids. You sometimes have to say the same thing over and over, but you never waver off of your message. And so all of these things together should help you understand, one, how difficult it is to sustain anything in this world. And it's also important to realize that it's not just about the simple task of being focused on something or not, but a much more human task of how do we create the kind of change we're looking for in life, and how much it takes and how much we need others, period. And again, I've mentioned it before, but it's worth repeating. You go back to, okay, but there's this task I have that is just me. I have to do it. I got to be the one to do it. Okay. So you don't actually have other people there that are holding you accountable, but those people that you're doing the thing for, or again, you can have a relationship with yourself as long as you understand it in the context of, I'm doing this for me to better grow or take care of myself or to give me more freedom in life, whatever it may be. That's still part of having a relationship involved in the sustaining process. And so you're hopefully feeling a little bit more clear, as I'm now probably nearing on beating a dead horse at this point. But I really want those questions to come out from you guys. I'm really wanting you to feel like, okay, I get what you're saying. Everything makes sense, but I still feel stuck here, or here. I want to be committed to you. I want to be consistent with you. And I'll be consistent in the form that I'll keep putting these podcasts out, as long as they're helpful and as long as people are getting something from them. But it is okay to come back to me and say, well, I want to be consistent in my learning and my growth and understanding this, and I feel like I might need more help in that. And you and I can find a way to create an equal exchange of energy where we're accountable to one another. You know what I mean? That's what I want to do for people, and that's what I want to teach you to do for others. So again, if you have these questions, you want to reach out through the website, hopelesslygiftedpodcast.com, or you find me on social media and you want to hit me up on the DMs, that would be great too. No matter what it is, feel free to reach out if that's helpful to you or you're feeling a little stuck or lost. And I'd be happy to reach out or have somebody on my team help reach out, because nobody does anything great alone. Thanks again, and see you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks again, and see you next time. Bye-bye.